During the first centuries of the Roman Republic, the army was still being formed, seeking to adapt to a constantly changing geographical and political reality. It was in this scenario that the Triarii emerged, soldiers who represented not only a military unit, but a reflection of the Roman society of the time, rigid, hierarchical, and deeply marked by the experience of war. The origin of the Triarii dates back to a period when Rome was still facing internal threats and neighboring tribes, such as the Samnites and the Gauls. The military structure inherited from the Etruscans, based on heavy phalanxes inspired by the Greek hoplites, proved ineffective in the face of the new combat dynamics. The need to adapt led to the creation of a more flexible and echeloned legion system. In this new model, the Triarii emerged as the last line of defense for the Roman infantry. But they were not just rearguard soldiers. They represented the pinnacle of military experience, made up of veterans hardened by time, bloody battles, and a life dedicated to war. They were generally the oldest in the army, but also the most respected. They did not enter the battlefield first. They were reserved for moments when defeat seemed inevitable. Their mere presence was a warning. If the Triarii were fighting, it was because Rome was on the verge of collapse. With the rise of reformist generals, such as Marcus Furius Camillus in the 4th century BC, the Roman army underwent a series of restructurings. It was then that the Triarii became consolidated as a strategic unit, officially emerging as an organized group within the legion. While the younger, more impetuous soldiers occupied the front line, the Triarii remained firm in the rearguard, ready to act with coolness and precision. The trust placed in them was so great that, for the Romans, their performance on the battlefield was synonymous with a heroic last gasp, the final attempt to transform a certain defeat into an improbable victory. This symbolic and practical importance shaped not only the organization of the army, but also the Roman imagination of courage, honor, and duty. The Latin expression residential ad triarios venit, we have reached the Triarios, arose precisely from this tradition, and was used even outside the battlefield as a metaphor for critical moments when all resources had been exhausted, leaving only the most experienced to save the day. The Roman legion, especially during the Republic, was meticulously divided to combine youth, vigor, experience, and strategy. This division followed a three-pronged structure called the Order Triplex Aces, where the infantry was organized into three main lines: Hastati, Principes, and Triarii. Each line represented a phase of combat and a degree of maturity of the soldiers. While the Hastati were the youngest and least experienced, and the Principes were at the peak of physical and tactical fitness, the Triarii, in the last line, were the veteran warriors, strategically positioned to act only when the situation became desperate. This tactical arrangement was not just a matter of combat, but a living demonstration of a military philosophy based on discipline and the rational use of force. The Triarii were not disposable. On the contrary, they were the legion's most valuable resource and were used with extreme caution. Their role went beyond direct combat. They maintained the cohesion of the troops, bolstered the morale of their comrades, and in many cases prevented less experienced soldiers from fleeing in panic. They were, by definition, the moral backbone of the army. When an enemy saw the Triarii going into action, they were not just facing soldiers. They were facing the very beating heart of the Roman war machine. The position of the Triarii also reflected their social status within the legion. Initially, the ranks were composed according to the wealth of the citizens, and the Triarii were among the wealthiest, able to afford the heaviest and most sophisticated weaponry. Over time, especially after reforms that placed more importance on experience than wealth, the role of the Triarii came to be filled by veterans of various backgrounds, united by something deeper than possessions: the honor of resisting when all seemed lost. This layered structure, youth at the front, vigor in the center, and wisdom in the rear, gave the Roman army a unique ability to adapt in battle. Furthermore, the Triarii played an indirect but crucial role as a strategic command reserve. Many officers used the movement or permanence of the Triarii as a signal for tactical decision. Keeping them stationary was a sign that the legion was still in control of the situation. Throwing them into combat meant maximum risk and a final attempt to turn the tide. In modern terms, it would be like saving a highly trained elite squad for the last stand, not out of fear of losing, but because one is confident that they are capable of changing the course of the war with a single advance. Visually, the Triarians commanded respect even before they entered combat. Their appearance was marked by solidity and the symbolic weight they carried. They were soldiers prepared to face the worst, and this was reflected in every detail of their equipment. The centerpiece of their armament was the asta, a long spear about 2 meters long, used both to keep the enemy at a distance and for precise piercings on the front line. It was a simple but effective weapon, ideal for static and defensive combat, as was the role of the Triarians on the battlefield. This spear symbolized resistance and discipline. The Triarians did not run, they did not charge impulsively. They waited for the right moment. As a secondary weapon, they carried the gladius, a short and lethal sword, about 84 centimeters long, suitable for hand-to-hand combat. It was a final tool for those who had exhausted all other options and now needed to fight to the end, eye to eye. They also used a robust, round shield, the clypeus, which offered ample protection and allowed the formation to be held firmly. However, over time, especially from the 3rd century BC onwards, many Triarians began to adopt the scutum, a taller oval shield, characteristic of the legion's tactical evolution. This change was not aesthetic, but functional. The scutum facilitated the integration of the Triarians into the most advanced defensive combat formations, such as the famous testudo, tortoise formation. The helmet was usually made of bronze, often decorated with crests or feathers, not only as an aesthetic element, but to intimidate the enemy and highlight their authority within the ranks. Many of these helmets also bore personal or family markings, and the shields were often painted with portraits of ancestors or protective symbols, in an attempt to invoke luck and honor in combat. This shows how much the Roman warrior valued legacy and tradition. Each Triarian was, in a way, a soldier and a walking monument. The armor of the Triarii varied according to the period and individual purchasing power, but it generally consisted of a metal cuirass or larica hamada, ring chain mail, which offered balance between mobility and protection. This type of armor, although heavy, was ideal for soldiers who did not rush into combat quickly, but who needed to resist for long periods. The combination of well-designed equipment and durability made the Triarii true defensive bastions. Every detail of their attire told the enemy, here, Rome has not yet fallen. The combat tactics of the Triarii were not only the fruit of personal experience, but a direct result of Roman military philosophy, which prioritized discipline, control, and psychological resistance. While the hastati and the principi sought more active and offensive advances, the Triarii acted with lethal patience, holding their positions until the moment when their entry into combat was absolutely necessary. They were the final reserve, the legion's retaining wall, the point at which the army decided whether to resist or to collapse. Their position at the back of the field was not a sign of weakness, but of contained power. Battles of the time followed a wave-like logic. The hastati, younger and more impetuous, began the combat by trying to break through the enemy line with aggression. If they failed, they retreated in order to make room for the principi, more experienced soldiers who continued the pressure. But if not even the principi could break the enemy, that was when the true weight of the legion revealed itself. The Triarii entered the scene. And when that happened, everything changed. The most common tactic was to let the enemy wear themselves down by facing the first 2 lines, only to be confronted by a wall of shields, spears, and veterans who knew every step of a battle. Unlike the younger soldiers, the Triarii did not run. They advanced with strategic slowness, using their spears to keep the enemy at a distance, and their shields as an extension of their own bodies. They formed cohesive and almost unbreakable ranks, using the terrain and time to their advantage. In many situations, this defensive posture turned the tide. Enemies who had previously advanced furiously ended up stagnating, unable to break through the last Roman layer. In prolonged battles, the entry of the Triarii meant new hope for the legion, but it was also a signal to the commanders that the battle had reached its most dangerous point. Furthermore, there was something almost symbolic in their way of fighting. The coolness of the Triarii in the midst of chaos made them seen as the cold-blooded of Rome, capable of maintaining order even when everything around them was falling apart. They did not shout. They did not display fury. They held back. They resisted. And this self-control was often more frightening to the enemy than the confrontation itself. That is why their actions were not only physical, but also psychological, both to bolster the morale of their comrades and to undermine the courage of whoever was on the other end of the line. Throughout the wars of the Roman Republic, the Triarii were present in several crucial campaigns, and in some of them, their performance was decisive for the fate of the legion and, in many cases, of the entire war. They not only held lines in imminent collapse, they were also used in innovative tactical ways by genius generals such as Publius Cornelius Scipio, the future Scipio Africanus, who redefined the role of the Triarii in critical moments. A striking example was the Battle of the Great Plains, fought in 203 BC, during the final phase of the Second Punic War. Scipio, deeply aware of the limitations and advantages of each unit, broke with the Roman tradition of keeping the Triarii strictly in the rear guard. Instead, he deployed them as a flanking force, surprising the Carthaginians with a highly coordinated and unexpected lateral offensive. What was supposed to be a final line of resistance became a spearhead, and the battle ended in total victory for Rome. This tactical audacity not only demonstrated the versatility of the Triarii, but further enhanced their importance as a decisive and flexible unit. Another memorable performance occurred at the legendary Battle of Zama in 202 BC, the final confrontation between Scipio and Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian military genius. Zama is remembered as the culmination of the Second Punic War, but also as the stage where the Triarii demonstrated their adaptability and strategic resilience. Scipio organized his legion with corridors between the ranks, a tactical maneuver to channel and neutralize the Carthaginian war elephants. After this initial phase, he reorganized his troops by placing the Triarii in the center of the formation, alongside the Principi, while the Hastati formed the flanks. This allowed the experience and steadfastness of the veterans to hold the center, where the fighting was most intense, ensuring control of the battle. These two examples not only demonstrate the practical importance of the Triarii, but also show how their reputation extended beyond military theory. When generals trusted the Triarii to turn seemingly hopeless scenarios around, they were trusting in what Rome had most solid: men who knew the pain of defeat and the honor of persistence. They won not through fury, but through control, and that control was often what decided who would return to Rome alive. Despite the prestige that the Triarii had gained during the height of the Republic, the end of the 2nd century BC brought profound changes that would forever change the structure of the Roman army and mark the end of this type of soldier. The legions, which until then had been based on categories organized by age, wealth, and experience, began to become professional armies, composed of soldiers recruited from among the poorest and most dispossessed citizens. This military revolution had a name and a date: the reforms of Gaius Marius, in the year 107 BC. Gaius Marius, a general and politician with an ambitious vision, realized that Rome was facing new challenges. The city was no longer fighting only against neighboring tribes or regional empires, but against coalitions of Germanic peoples, internal rebellions, and large-scale conflicts, which required more mobile, uniform, and permanent legions. The idea of an army based on private property and accumulated experience, as was the case with the Triarii, became a logistical obstacle. In its place emerged the concept of the career soldier, supported by the state and trained according to a unified standard. With these reforms, the traditional division between Hastati, Principes, and Triarii was completely abolished. Now all Roman heavy infantrymen wore the same equipment, received the same training, and fought under the same doctrine. This gave the new legions impressive tactical efficiency, but it also meant the end of the Triarii's unique identity as veterans of the last line. It is important to note that this transition was neither immediate nor entirely painless. Many generals and commanders who had learned to fight within the tripartite logic still tried to apply old tactics to modern battlefields. But the weight of change was inevitable. Professionalization brought greater mobility, greater operational cohesion, and allowed the Roman army to expand quickly beyond Italy. However, something was lost in the process: the symbolic image of the veteran who only stood up when the situation was on the verge of collapse. The replacement of the Triarii represented more than just a military innovation. It was, in fact, a milestone in the birth of a new type of Roman soldier, more disciplined, yes, but also less tied to family traditions, ancestral honor, and the quiet heroism that characterized the men of the rearguard. With that, the Triarii disappeared, not as defeated, but as pillars quietly replaced by a colder, more standardized military machine. Even after they formally disappeared from the army structure, the Triarii never ceased to occupy a special place in Roman military memory, and more than that, in the collective imagination of Western civilization itself. Their legacy transcended combat formations, spears, and shields, and became an enduring symbol of resilience, honor, and wisdom in the face of adversity. Even language inherited this symbolic power. The expression residential ad triarios venit, he has reached the Triarii, continued to be used to represent critical situations in which only the most experienced could reverse fate. During the Empire, when the legions no longer had hastati, principes, or Triarii, the figure of the cold and calculating veteran soldier was still revered in the speeches of generals and writers. Many imperial commanders sought to evoke this ideal when describing their troops or motivating their men. The idea that when all else fails, only the coolness and determination of those who have seen chaos before and come back alive will remain. This image continued to influence Roman military doctrine, and later, that of several European armies, which admired the emotional stability and discipline of those who fought without despair. Beyond the battlefield, the Triarii archetype served as the basis for other cultural constructions. They came to represent the last hope, the last bastion of any human effort, be it in war, in a political crisis, or even in personal decisions. In modern studies of military history, the Triarii are often cited as one of the first documented manifestations of the concept of strategic elite reserve, which demonstrates their importance not only for ancient Rome, but for the very evolution of Western combat logic, and even for the contemporary spectator, who knows Rome through books, documentaries, or strategy games. The Triarii still carry a particular fascination. There is something noble in imagining men who fought not for glory, but because they knew that, if they fell, all would be lost. They did not seek center stage, but when they appeared, they changed the ending of the show. Thus, even though they were extinct as a unit, the Triarians survived as a living and eternal idea of resistance. They were more than soldiers. They were the reflection of a Rome that, even on the brink of collapse, knew how to stand firm, until the last man. If you've come this far, it's because you feel the same as us, the strength of history running through your veins. The Triarians didn't fight for easy glory. They stood firm when all seemed lost. And that's what we do here. Rescue forgotten stories, silent heroes, and battles that shaped the world. So, if you believe that the past still has much to teach, join our ranks. Subscribe to the channel now, because every week we bring you more strategies, wars, and epic characters from ancient Rome. And if this video made you imagine, give you goosebumps, or learn something new, leave a like. It's a sign that the Legion is still alive. Are you ready for the next campaign? See you in the next video. Ave Roma.